Here we are again, Jackie and I this time. Jackie was in three of our previous episodes with Gabe, and I'm shifting a little bit to talk to people individually, and we'll go back to two as two are available simultaneously. And in the meantime, I'm going to talk to people I know who have been actively engaged in this conversation, and I also know are interested in having the conversation. And I am also obviously interested in this. So it helps to have someone with me like Jackie, who has spent a lot of time with me over the last, how long has it been?
I don't know. I wish I did know, don't
I
you? I
mean,
guess I could look in my emails.
yeah, I think it's almost 2 years.
No.
Well, that's when we started in the early May originally.
Okay.
When once COVID hit, we decided to do a weekly Zoom meeting, which has lasted now for almost 100 weeks.
Wow.
And we've only recently started doing 3 a month, so everybody gets a weekend off. And
And we're all in pain that weekend. Kidding.
and we talk to each other individually then.
Right, right.
But it's been an extraordinary process because we've probably had 30 people in total, with almost 10 every week on the number, without trying to promote and push and the boundaries, but actually just invite people who we know are interested. And then of them, they come and go. They're not always there. So there's some regulars that are pretty consistently there every week, but there's a little fluidity around the edges. And the number always seems to be 10 to 12. And it's a great conversation. We set it for an hour and a half every Sunday, and we have gone as long as 4 hours and 40 minutes because I told everyone that we can go as long as they'd like. And what's interesting in this conversation is that time takes on a whole different dimension when the topic is as dynamic as something actually happening, rather than talking about or promoting ideas that are difficult to bear and heavy and dense and conflicted. So Jackie is here, and welcome, Jackie.
Hi, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I tried to explain the meeting to people, and they're like, "What? The meeting goes on for how long? Like, how? That sounds terrible." I'm like, "You have to just listen to it." And then they get it. They're like, "Wow, I wish this went on for 24 hours."
Well, and it really does.
Right, right,
And
right.
that's part of the discussion, and part of this podcast is an attempt to simply introduce, and I say attempt only because each individual's readiness makes the difference between value out of something or a lack of value being gotten. We each have the ability to say no to something, dismiss things, deny things, defy things, defend against things. We each have that ability, and then we can live in that world where we think that defiance and defensiveness is the right thing because it has nothing to do with us, and very often end up wondering why we feel alone at some point, having made these decisions collectively in 100 different ways, and end up realizing we've just continually shut the door, and wonder why we seem like there's no light, we're suffocating and alone. And it's not a surprise. And it's Herb Kagan says that he says it's like turning a dimmer on a light, just a tiny bit every day, and you don't really notice it as it goes, but when it finally goes out, you have no light. And it shouldn't be a surprise, but those incremental steps that occur from this idea that what we're talking about isn't happening 24 hours a day. And in
Right.
a sense, if it's timeless and spaceless, it isn't happening in time at all. But for human experience, it's happening constantly as a present state of being.
Right.
And in that present state, as we're talking about it definitely opens up avenues that, as you know, have been both hard for some people, and they've been very reactive about it and gotten very angry because it got very close to some ideas that they thought were true, they thought were real, they thought were limits that they couldn't go beyond. And generally, those types of limits are ideas that we think are true and real. But the irony is, we never have to think an idea is true and real if it's actually true or real, because it doesn't require to be fought for or held or promoted. It just, truth and reality is just a natural state of being that we all share. So we know what that is. And this is about introducing thought to that knowingness and starting to recognize that thought follows that. Thought isn't the requirement to get to it. To require thought to get to it asks thought to be reality and truth, when thought is a product of reality and truth. And our bodies are a product of that. And our being nature is not a product of our body or thinking. It's a product of life and light and love and whatever the components would be of something absolute and infinite and unlimited and omnipotent and omnipresent and omniscient and all of those sort of omni words that.
Truth and beauty.
Yeah, and elegance.
Mm-hmm.
And simplicity. Yeah. We talked about that last week, that Einstein said that that in abstract pure mathematics, which is abstract mathematics, which isn't, they don't use it to try to figure out how things work, where applied mathematics is about figuring out how to use math to make things work. How do we get things in the universe to work properly? And the book that I listened to on that said that abstract math, what they look for there is simplicity, beauty, and elegance.
I love that.
And what's interesting is that's considered impractical mathematics, of course.
Right, when it's the most practical.
Well, I would say it's the context for the applicable mathematics, sort of like the infinite reality or life is the context for our bodies. And we're a product of it. We are not the maker of it. We're not the concluder of it. We're not the decider of it. So to set off an emotion in a direction where we create a conflict by thinking a thought that isn't true, that's wrong. And I would say a wrong thought is something that has no applicable application, can't be applied. It can't be utilized. When we have those wrong thoughts and think they're right, we're constantly applying wrong and wondering why things go wrong so often, and see everybody else is wrong because everything we have to do with them seems to be tainted with this preoccupation. So you were telling me a little bit about before you came to the first meeting, and really it's a discussion. It's not a meeting. It's not a program. It's not a course. It's just to talk about amongst people. And the idea is, if we can do it together for 4.5 hours, we could probably go into the world and start having this conversation too, where we were a little more accurate and a little less volatile in relation to our relations, and start to see that everybody has this knowing nature. And as I see it in them, I have a better chance of expressing my own thoughts in a way that don't impale me in my relationship with them, but begin to actually brighten the relationship itself through the interaction that naturally occurs.
Right. It's like promoting peace in a way that you can promote it, a way to help people experience it in themselves.
Yeah.
To be the change that they want to experience. Yes, so a friend of mine, we were talking about this sort of stuff, and she said, I think you would like this meeting I go to. And she told me about it, and I was like, yes, that is what I want to go to. That's what I love. So, I mean, the first time I tuned in, I had prayed for such a meeting, because I had friends that studied this sort of thing, but then I don't want to take their inventory, but I didn't have anybody to really share this stuff with, because I really practiced it, and we need somebody to talk about it with, because otherwise I'm like, am I crazy? Like, why doesn't anybody else want to feel this love that I feel all the time? Like, I would share these type of thoughts, and then they would be like, yeah, that's true, Jackie, but there's also this horrible stuff going on in the world. And I'm like, I'm very aware of the horrible stuff. And I grew up in a family where I mean, most people have, I wouldn't say most people, but for me, I didn't have like peace and calm. It was very chaotic. I don't have a memory of peace. I didn't have peace until a few years ago. And now that I've spent my whole life without peace, I'm not letting myself not have peace. So being in our group is a place where I can enjoy my peace with other people, and I find it hard. I'm very social. I have a ton of friends. I'm around a bunch of different people all the time. I have great conversations with different people, but not but and I really appreciate our conversations because they say a true friend brings you to the light. And I find a majority of the people in the world want to suck the light out of me. And I'm out there trying to bring everybody to the light with me, and they're trying to suck it out of me. And so I love, and that's something I have to deal with, that I want to change my thinking around that when I go out, my light's going to be sucked on, So, but I'm very grateful to have a space where I can go with like-minded people that also bring each other to the light.
Well, I told you too when you said that, because I didn't know what the whole history was. I remember when you came the first time, and actually came for probably 6 or 7 before you said anything. And you were quiet, and many people were quiet because I suspect they were afraid to say anything that I would critique, because the challenge of having words looked at and thoughts looked at openly is something that I suspect we've all navigated around defensively, and certainly I did growing up, in a way that had me think that the people that were my friends were the ones that agreed with the insanity I was promoting and the lies I was perpetuating. And I felt the people who were not my friends were the ones that got close to the edges of those thoughts and put those thoughts at risk. And I thought they were hurting me, and they were offending me, and they were challenging me, when in fact it was the limits I was protecting that I was feeling, not them at all.
Right.
Too preoccupied with my own preoccupation to even notice who they were or what they were offering. And so there's an implied blindness, a forgetfulness, which is the opposite of forgiving. It's making believe that what I need to do is what I need to do for the self I call my own, which is a bundle of thoughts I have about who I think I am. And then I forget that I'm actually caused that self to seem to be real and true, and then think my life is about defending it against anyone else who proposes a thought that opposes that. And what's interesting about conversation is all it is about is thoughts. That's all it ever is. And if we're able to speak openly, which we are, if we can batter each other with thoughts about the conflicts that we represent in those expressions of our limited ideas, if we can take those positions and fight for those things, certainly we could talk about those things where it doesn't include a fight too. Certainly that would be another possibility, rather than have the antagonism and the righteousness and the resentments and the sort of irritations that you get around, that I get around certain people, and I still do. I mean, driving for me is like my best. That's what I do my meditating, because I have so many ideas about the way people should drive, and it's just astonishing to me what an incredibly collective effort that is. The most dangerous thing we tend to do on a daily basis without thinking about it or seeing it as a threat. And then see that for the most part it works, but it works on the backs of actions that are often incredibly dangerous and incredibly thoughtless and incredibly short-sighted and incredibly curious, in my mind, as to how people actually get the license to drive the car. And I wonder if they do. So that's one of the areas that I get to really watch how my predispositions and thought. And it isn't to suggest that other people are driving right all the time and I need to begin to accept what they're doing is right. The issue is that it exposes a lot of the predisposed thoughts that I have that I don't even think I'm having. until circumstances happen and I see how quickly I jump to these sort of reactive. I immediately think they're an idiot rather than what they just did was idiotic.
Right.
Right. I see the person is completely idiot rather than say, that probably wasn't. Then I start realizing, you know what? I make a lot of those moves too and feel wholly justified in the fact that I just decided to go that direction. I wasn't cutting you off. I just decided, and since boom, and I'm in the other arena.
And Waze is like, go left now, trying to kill you. But I mean, what does it mean about me that I don't have road rage? I've never noticed once that somebody didn't use their turn signal. And I have, but I would be.
That might concern me.
Right. I know. Like my ex would be, like she's like the most calmest person in the world, but then behind the wheel, she would be yelling and screaming. And I'm like, you're yelling and screaming at people that I probably do the same thing. But I don't realize I'm doing it. I'm like, so I don't know. It's just interesting that everybody I know has road rage, but they're calm and peaceful in life. Yeah. Where this was at a time when I wasn't calm and peaceful in life.
Right.
But I still didn't have road rage. I actually almost hit somebody one time and he was like really mad. And I said, I'm sorry, you just met the worst driver in the world. And like, you can tell your friends you met her. And then he laughed.
Took the pressure off a little bit.
Yeah. But I'm not trying to drive like a jerk, but I kind of just do. I don't know why. But
well, it's metaphoric though. In any event, whatever the circumstances are where we find irritations, it's a chance to look at the limits. What irritates me are the limits of my thoughts. It's not what other people are doing. And the irresponsible action for me is to say it's what they're doing rather than what I'm doing, so that I flip it around to try to escape the responsibility for what I'm doing. And essentially in our discussion, we have talked about the idea that we're all fully responsible. It isn't something I'm responsible 100%, you're responsible 100%. Everybody's responsible 100% if the platform of our existence is the same one. Because that platform, if it's responsible for us, provided us a body to be responsible for. And that means all the actions, including the thoughts. So
Ooh, I love that.
Yes, thoughts are actions. As a matter of fact, there's never any physical action ever taken voluntarily that doesn't start with a thought, ever. It's always associated to a thought. So if the source of my thinking, which is given me to help guide my body and the choices I make, which I'm free to make any choice I want, through the world and interacting in the world, because I'm interacting all the time. And the question is, am I interacting or am I interreacting? Am I causing conflict or am I causing engagement and offering a wholeness and a participation where I'm a crew member on a boat and I'm doing my job and it creates efficiency for the other people to do their job rather than all of a sudden I'm on below deck, complaining about something or another, preoccupied when I should be doing something, causing somebody else to have to catch up, make up, become desperate to do what they're doing because I'm not doing my job, and start to function in a way that's actually functional rather than dysfunctional. And if those are the basic premise of the thinking, then if I'm thinking in ways that I think I shouldn't be thinking, rather than at least conceding that if I'm thinking it, whether I should or shouldn't be thinking it is irrelevant because I'm thinking it, and have a relationship to that thing I'm doing that's actually based on what I'm doing rather than what I should or shouldn't be doing. Because it's kind of like being where I am. If I think I shouldn't be where I am, and where I am is always where I am,
ooh,
then my thinking doesn't change where I am. It just puts me in conflict with the ideas that I need to be somewhere else that I can never get to, because I'm always in the present. I'm starting to create a mental practice of making believe that I can be somewhere else when I'm always where I am, rather than at least say, well, if I have that somewhere else to get to and would like to be in that place sometime when I'm in the present, It might be worth admitting I'm in the present right now, thinking of that in those terms, and then ask myself, what is it about this moment that I feel so depleted about, so deficient about, so lacking in, and start to actually address that as the source, rather than think I should be somewhere I can't be. Start to actually say, wow, let me learn from this moment that has me feeling so, what am I doing in the present that feels so lacking, that I need so much more to be fulfilled? What am I doing that isn't fulfilling my natural state of fulfillment? If I'm already fulfilled, what am I thinking about in contrast to that, that isn't true, that isn't real, that I'm relying on? And we don't need an answer to that question to be able to simply say, if there's a question and there's doubt, if there's a question, there is doubt. And if there is doubt, it's something I'm thinking, not something I am. My source is not changed. My absolute nature of knowing is not changed. It's just my desperation to maintain that thought and get that thought right. When I commit to it as though I'm going to make it what it isn't, rather than have it as it is, I go off on a path that's impossible to ever resolve. And that's effectively the obsessive thinking.
Yeah. For me, I like to say I'm satisfied in this moment and really feel that I'm satisfied in the moment. And predominantly I am. And it's very miraculous, and it's very much in because of our conversations. And I do find my Sundays are pretty magical.
Well, but part of the not feeling is beginning to allow the not feeling, which I've gotten better at and which I harp on during the conversation, because it tends to be the issue, this little issue of always trying to feel better is an indication that we must be doing something pretty regularly that's worse to give us the impression that we need to feel better or need to feel satisfied. Because there must be something that we're chronically doing that's dissatisfying and feels worse, because it's worse to be chronically doing it, that we don't even think we're doing, if this idea of always feeling better and being more satisfied and getting more fulfilled and all that stuff is constantly something we've got to get to, rather than recognize it's only the depleted, deficient thoughts, the scarce thoughts I'm having now that don't have any substance, that I'm experiencing in my feelings. My natural state of being isn't disrupted. Neither is yours, neither is anyone's ever. The fulfillment of my actual state of being is never less than full. And so the ability to deal with feeling it isn't is starting to say, oh, this lack I am feeling is telling me that my thinking is lacking, not me as a being, not us as a collective. It's just what I'm thinking. And it kind of, as that revelation begins to occur and that view starts, you start seeing how chronically we and others around us, because what I tended to engage in mostly before I started having this conversation in absolute terms were all of the relative ideas I had with people to justify why I shouldn't be where I was with what I had and needed to be somewhere else to get something else that I didn't have. And I would hang out with people, and sort of our talks and conversations would always be about the stories that we each had to justify something's wrong and we got to fix it.
Right.
Not even noticing that the story itself was the wrong, because nothing happens at any other time than the present. And if the present is where everything's happening, when we're experiencing a sense of lack, it's what we're doing then in the moment that we're experiencing the sense of lack now that is causing it. It's not something else somewhere else. It's not some past thing. It's not some future thing.
Right. I've taken out of my vocabulary, I'll be happy when, because I am happy now. And we talked about this before about contentment and being in bliss versus happiness.
Yeah.
What do you feel about joy? Following
My younger
joyful.
sister's a joy, and I've always loved her immensely.
Your younger sister's name is Joy?
When my mother brought her home, I mean, I was 10 years old, and it was the first time I really appreciated a baby. And I was like, oh my God, look at this little creature. And I took her everywhere.
Oh, cute.
So I always have that association to the word, but my
You were
sense
10?
is,
You were
what's
10?
that?
You were 10?
Yeah.
Were
Yeah.
you an only child until Joy came around?
No, there were four of us. And then she came, and my mother believed in pairs. So she had one after that, who was also an angel, came home. And then Joy
Oh,
took care of her, and we took care of them. And
how
so there
sweet.
was a gap enough for us to appreciate that, and
Mhm.
support my mother and all that. But my sense is, Jackie, that emotions are products of thinking.
Mm.
And that bliss you're talking about is a product of not thinking. It,
Ooh.
it's what, meditation is really designed to remind us of. And think of, if we're being reminded of something, it just means that it's part of our mind. We're being reminded, putting our attention back to something that actually exists. Like remembering suggests that when we think we're not where we are, we're dismembered, right? And remembering is just saying, no, I'm always where I am. I've never been anywhere else. I can think I'm not, and I can think I should be I can do all those things, but all those steps cause these feelings I'm having of dismay and desperation and despair and all of those things that depress me, that I think now I need to be happy about to get over, and I need to be confident about to get over, and I need to be ambitious about to get over, rather than say, wait a minute, if I'm doing those things, I'm thinking thoughts chronically that are wrong, and thinking I'm not thinking them, which is what addiction is.
Right.
It's
Even
thinking that,
characterizing your thoughts as wrong. It's
yeah.
it's interesting because I encourage people not to, and myself, not to beat myself up. And then, but also to change habits, but without beating yourself up.
Well, the habit is, in fact, a beating up.
Well, and what if I'm doing an ineffectual behavior?
Generally, it's
But
my sense.
how do I change that without beating myself up?
Well,
Or
if
saying I'm
you're,
not perfect right now?
that's like the heroin addict saying, how do I do this without losing my job and my house and my wife and avoiding overdose? If the behavior is ineffectual, why not just recognize that it must be based on something that isn't true and be effective?
Okay. But I mean, there are things.
Give me a description, and maybe I'm missing your broader point.
Okay. All right. Ineffectual behavior. Um, I I like to track my time on how much I spend on things because I have the tendency to be a productive procrastinator where I exert myself. So I'm very, yeah. So I exert myself and then don't get the main thing that I needed to get done.
That would be, I would say, addictive thinking, because it's the exact opposite. You're claiming you want to do this, but you get exactly the opposite with more energy than it would take to actually get the thing you're looking for, right? You don't even get the thing, and you spend a lot of energy,
Right.
right? That's like the addict. And I had somebody say yesterday that they were in a negotiation. The guy gave him everything he wanted in the first 5 minutes, and then he talked for another 40 minutes and talked himself out of the whole deal.
That's really funny.
So we have these underlying ideas. You described them earlier as fixed ideas, and I would say that's true, except that they're broken ideas that
Right.
that can't be fixed because they don't have a place. Lies by nature have no substance. And a lie isn't just a wrong thought, because if we have a wrong thought, we can immediately correct. But the thing you're describing is, why do I go so far and so long and exhaust so much energy to end up getting to a place that's exactly the opposite of what I headed toward in the beginning?
Yeah.
I could have stayed there and had nothing. Why
Right.
even bother? All the resources spent. That's exactly what addictive thinking is. And ineffectual is just sort of powerlessness. And
Right.
remember about procrastination is that no procrastinator ever puts it off. So you're actually good at it. It's a choice, it's something you want for some purpose to get your attention for something you're unwilling to admit you're causing.
When I put things off to the last minute, I'll do them so much faster.
Well, that's different than not doing them or ending up having a result that's the opposite of what you originally intended. I did the same thing in college. I learned that if I went to the library in the last 72 hours of a semester and did my term paper, I got A's every time. I had no room for error then. It was focus, learn,
Right.
get it down, not sit around. And in those other days, I'd have so much time that it would seem like I had to create, the greatest thesis ever written in human history. And it would just all seem impossible. But when the time was tight, I'd get clear, which interestingly is the way things happen. Things happen where you are doing what you're doing. They don't get completed by thinking about them.
Right,
Right?
exactly. The hows and whys are not my business. It's my just doing it.
Yes. So procrastination is a choice, and it generally that self-abuse that seems to come with it is just a misunderstanding and a lack of trust that you'll eventually do the thing and get it done.
Oh,
Because
that's beautiful. That's what I needed. I love that.
so we've brutalized ourselves in ways that we don't admit and then act like we should just have great faith in ourselves, and we don't. And it
Right.
isn't ourself that it's the self I'm referring to is the self of thought, the one that we create in all the ideas we have about who we think we are. It's ego. It's this sort of false image that parades around that's constantly in a battle in our head in the voices that we speak domestically and argue over and try to refine and talk about and feel ashamed about and don't really want to talk about openly because it seems so ridiculous. And yet, for the most part, everybody else is doing it. When you finally open up, you go, oh, you're doing that too? Isn't that everybody's laughing rather than crying alone in their couch?
Right.
And it really starts to show how flimsy it is. Now, I don't suspect that there's anything wrong with ego, but making believe it's who we actually are is exactly the same as what happens with a lie when we take a wrong thought and make believe that it becomes true and real once we start defending it. Because once we start defending it, now we become the makers of truth and reality. And now that's a big thing for simply deciding that a wrong thought is right. Because we no longer seem to have the freedom. We no longer seem to have the freedom because everything's about appearances and ego. It's not about how things are, it's how they appear. We no longer seem to have the freedom to actually let it go because we're so busy desperately trying to fight for it and make it come into reality when it never will, that it's exactly what you just described. All the effort that goes into it ends up getting us exactly nothing more than we had when we started. Jim Carrey said in that great Ayurvedic commencement speech he gave, he said, why do we work so hard to give the ego what it wants when all it ever promises us is what we already have?
Mm.
And he's talking about that spiritual experience that he had, that essential experience he had after having done that movie on Andy Kaufman. And he said, I got so into the character that when I was done with the movie, I didn't know who I was. And I literally didn't know who I was. I realized how flimsy the ideas I had about myself. If they could go away in the matter of months I spent doing a movie after a lifetime worth of maintaining them, there was nothing there. And then he envisioned having this experience with the, what was it? The Eternal Mind, the movie he did.
Spotlight of Eternal Spotlight of the
Sunlight, maybe it's Sunlight of the Eternal, something
Yeah.
like that. Anyway, he was in a field and he had that experience, and the next thing he knows, he's getting a call to do that movie.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that.
And he'd had that awareness, and he started painting. And it's very interesting to listen to him now, because not only is he a great, brilliant comic, but he's had an experience that my suspicion is gave him probably a greater sense of worth and value than he always got from the fulfillment of being a great comic.
Right.
Because most in my experiences of those things we think about eventually getting and being successful at, when we finally get that success, we don't feel the satisfaction we expected when we imagined it.
Right. Because we're still there. We're still right. It's still us.
Well, and again, it's this idea that it's something in the future and not here now. And
Mm-hmm.
what I've done is perfected the idea when I finally get there, I'll be happy. And when I finally get there, I'll be the same way I am now, thinking I need to be somewhere else.
Right.
And it just perpetuates that whole thing. Now, to the earlier point about ego not necessarily being wrong, my sense is we're able to pick up characters every day. Shakespeare talked about it. We're all actors on a stage. We can pick up characters and let them go, and we can act the funny part, and we can act the clown, and we can act the dramatic part, and we can do all those things. And in the freedom of doing them, we can also not do them as quickly and actually be accurate in our interaction and honest in our interaction with what's going on around us, rather than need to pose as anything.
Right.
So it doesn't become this attempt not to do what we're doing and not think anymore and never have an obsessive thought and always be happy and all those things. My sense is that depression becomes a very different experience when you simply accept you're depressed or recognize that what you're thinking is depressing and start to live with that for a minute or 20 seconds or an hour. And if you live with it for a minute and see the value, which you will if you allow it to be what it is, you'll start seeing that your body's actually speaking to you, not in this crazy conversation in our head that we're trying to negotiate that never seems to get settled, but it's actually speaking in bodily language, saying something you're doing is depressing. And if you're willing to pay attention, and it's not always in language, it's because we put words to feelings, right? When we were talking about feelings earlier, feelings don't have, when my senses sense what they sense, they don't feel feelings in words, they just feel what they're experiencing, the sum total of everything going on, including what I'm thinking in relation to what I'm thinking about everything going on. So that presence is always knowing, and the body is designed to give us guidance in where we're heading. It actually are some of our senses beyond the five senses and beyond the sixth sense that we refer to. They have 11 or 12 of them, are that we know we have like an automatic GPS system in our body, and we generally know which direction to go to get where we're heading without having any more information than we have. We generally have a sense of direction. We have a sense of where we are on the planet in relation to others, where things are, because there's an awareness that we're part of, that's naturally a part of us. If we don't listen to the body that's telling us when we're depressed that we're thinking something depressed, and we leap over the thing we're doing and think it's about everything we're seeing and that's happening seemingly to us, we're missing the chance to actually build our thought life on the fulfillment of how it's designed rather than how we think it should be, and how we constantly brutalize ourselves into making believe it should be, and those fixed ideas we believe we have to defend, which aren't fixed at all, for them to need to be fixed, because reality doesn't change and move, and it doesn't need us to think about it at all. So there is no fixed idea that's worth fixing. If they're all broken, let them be broken and let them be. They will fall apart naturally. It's the opposition to doing what we're doing that maintains these thoughts as though they're so real and true that our life depends on it. Our life is actually in the same way that you talked earlier about putting all that effort and ending up with the exact opposite result. The thing we're doing, claiming to try to get better, is causing the stress in our body that's undermining our ability to live longer. It's actually killing us. It's exactly what addiction does. It undermines our ability to actually be healthy. It undermines every system the body has to maintain balance, throws it into imbalance. And so we think we need to get more balance in our life. And we know it, we recognize it, and then deny that we're the cause of it. So emotions, getting back to that real quickly, they're always associated to colors, aren't they?
Yeah, for sure.
And white light is the sum total of all colors. So a prism, when basically it divides light, or a rainbow when it divides light, it's showing the span of the light waves that are visible to us. That's all that it is. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet is basically the range. But there's an infinite number of variations in there, because every one of those color variations in between can be sliced into smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. So we attach emotions to that. My sense is our thinking guides our emotions. When we have blocks and clouds and create covers, what gets through is what we feel. And we describe it. by I'm depressed, I
Right.
feel blue, I'm angry, I'm
Because we're seeing
afraid,
it through that lens.
jealous. Yes. Jealousy would be yellow, like fear, cowardice,
Wouldn't jealousy be green? Green with
green,
envy?
envy. Yeah. Yeah. But I also think of it as cowardice because it's an attempt to blame somebody else for the inability of ourself to feel fulfilled and to feel independent enough to recognize that our independence is based on our absolute dependence. One of the paradoxes in AA is that independence comes from dependence. What's the dependence? On a power greater than ourself. What are we doing? Starting to think in terms greater than our thinking. Just conceding that maybe there's something bigger than our thoughts stops the fight about trying to maintain the thought, or begins to. And yet, if we're always asked to grow, it means that there's an infinite space to grow into. And if, to your point earlier, we simply concede that it's always as it is now, regardless of how I feel, if I'm feeling depressed, I can say, I'm feeling depressed because my feelings are an accurate reflection of my thoughts. And if I accept it where it is, if I let it lie, like on the golf course where the ball is, that's where I get to play from. That's where I begin to make the next move from, rather than think it shouldn't be. I need to overcome it. I need to escape it. And that's what compulsions and reactivity and defenses and irritations and impulsive behaviors are all about.
Yeah, rather than thinking that should have been a hole in one, somebody disturbed me, like just go play it from, I like that. When I have sadness or depression, I let myself feel it immediately and then I move on from there. I let myself feel it for an amount of time and then I move on from there.
Well, I would suggest, to the degree that we don't feel what's actually happening because we want to move on, we're using denial to pretend we're done with it, and it's up to our thinking to put it to rest, rather than say this will be something that's going to come up again. We're going to put it back down under the sand, but the sand's going to wear out or the bubble's going to rise, and at some point it's going to come up. And think about how people refer to that. They're caught off guard by emotions. Right? What is that saying? We're on guard all the time. If we're the guard and the keeper of those emotions, by not saying immediately, if it's happening, it's what I'm doing. If it's happening, it's what I'm doing. If it's happening, it's what I'm doing. And the depression.
We're on guard, we're thinking with our heads and not our hearts.
Well, I don't know. I don't know where thinking happens, and I don't know whether the heart thinks or I think those are all metaphoric ideas for this concept of thinking more organically than analytically.
Coming from fear rather than faith.
Well, I would say that we should come from fear whenever we're thinking things are true that aren't true, and that self-imposed induced fear is in fact an accurate assessment of what again we're thinking. Right? So if we're coming from fear, then we're thinking things that are wrong. And if I think I need to get away from the fear, I'm actually perpetuating the fear by maintaining it, and thinking can overcome it when it's caused by thinking to begin with. So I've got thinking starting it, and thinking it can get rid of it. And now I have thinking maintaining it, all at the same time.
The only way to get rid of it is to let it be.
Yes. And I would say that's what forgiveness.
And I'm still trying to get rid of it. So just let it be.
Yes. Well, and how to do that is just say it is what it is. I'm doing what I'm doing.
It is.
I'm doing what I'm doing. I don't need to understand it any more than that to be honest about it. And if I'm doing what I'm doing, I am doing what I'm doing. So at least there I'm taking a first step that's accurate enough to have a relationship to what I'm doing that isn't conflicted. And again, it's an absolute statement to say I'm doing what I'm doing, right?
Right.
Just like I could say I'm not doing what I'm not doing.
I like that. I'm doing what I'm doing. It's really fun.
Well, and it's easy because you say, okay, well, so it stops me thinking I need to understand it, get to the bottom of it, uncover it, discover what it was, figure it out. All those things lead to doubt. All those things, anything that leads to a question is based on doubt. And the resolution is never found in doubt, because doubt is what leads to risk and fear.
Right. So we have to doubt.
So it's literally saying, if I'm thinking these things and I don't even think I'm thinking them, the experience I'm having and feeling is telling me something is depressing that I'm thinking, and start to limit my feelings to seeing the feelings as a consequence of thought rather than feeling as a consequence of who I am in some defective way, that I'm just fucked up and I'm never going to be any better, and I'm just an idiot, right? And the reason we carry that thought is because we tend to refuse to simply have what we're doing is what we're doing and allow that thing to disappear so we can see how magical it is when it leaves, and then begin to say, I didn't think it was magical when I kept it. I thought I was condemned by some outside mythical force that was superstitiously running around and throwing darts at me and causing me this pain. I thought I'd been singled out by the entire universe because I was simply unwilling to admit I was causing an impact by my own thoughts. And it completely, you begin to see how magical thinking and wishful thinking start playing into all this, to think, well, I'll get better and everything, I'm going to win the lottery and I'm going to take care of all my problems. Rather than say, what if I just live with the problem as a problem right now and let depression be depression and not create this opposition force where I need to think positive thoughts all the time.
Right.
As I've said in our discussion, nobody comes to me in the hundreds of people I've ever worked with and said, I need to think worse. I need to learn to think negative thoughts.
Yeah, that's so true.
Why would that be if there wasn't something we were doing we didn't think we were doing that was negative? And the negativity isn't negative in some bad way. It's just an attempt to negate what we're doing in a positive way. Depression isn't wrong until we think we shouldn't be depressed. And now we've created, it's like if I'm 6'3" and I think I should be 6'1", all day long is going to be a problem for me. I'm going to bump my head on things, and I'm going to do all sorts of things to prove that I should be 6'1". It would just be ridiculous to do that. I mean, the comedies are based on that.
Right.
We do it in thought because we can keep it hidden and think it's not revealed, when in fact it's being revealed through our anxiety and the stress and the things we do that create conflicts between other people and the way we look at other people, the contempt we have, and so forth. It all reveals itself. There's nothing hidden in all.
Right.
Everett hit on this last week, and I think he really got it when he said he sat on the couch all day just to take a day off because he's so busy all the time. And he said, you know what, I'm just going to sit here today. I'm not going to use my phone. I'm not going to watch TV. I'm not going to read. I'm just going to sit here. And he watched the thoughts come up and the impulses come up, and talked about how he tried to keep them down because they became so obvious to him. And that's the fight. When we allow the parade to go by, it will pass. When we insist on trying to stop it, we will be in it and think that we have no choice but to go along with it.
Right. I've heard to look at thought like you're a dog watching traffic go by.
Yeah. Except sometimes they decide to try to outrun the traffic.
And bite the tire.
So the point of the present being present is that if it's always present, it's always new, and it never gets old. So there's no time continuum in it. And the possibility for us to make believe what we're doing we shouldn't be doing is possible. Certainly not something we shouldn't be doing. If we can be doing it, it's something we're doing when we're doing it.
Right.
And rather than take on the judge and jury role of convicting and sentencing ourselves to life without parole or probation of self-abuse and this internal turmoil and struggle that we suffer, which is greater than anyone has ever done to us.
Right. Yeah.
Always, because it's 24/7. It's not something that happens occasionally when we see them, or 30 years ago when they stopped.
Right.
Or before they stopped. It's happening now all the time. If that is going on and it's addiction, and I would suggest it is, because it's something we don't think we're doing while we're doing it. And that very well describes an addiction. Nobody who's doing heroin says, I'm looking, unless they're really trying to kill themselves, and some people do. But for the most part, most people die. They call it accidental overdoses. It's not an accident when you tempt fate by making believe you're going to be the exception to the rule, when you know that thousands of people are dying from overdoses every year. It isn't an accident. It's denial. It's a chance to pretend we're oblivious to what's obvious. And that's a sick way of living.
Right.
So
I like that, oblivious to what's obvious. Yeah, both my parents are alcoholics and their parents are alcoholics, but no part of me thought I was going to be an alcoholic.
of course.
I was shocked. I'm still surprised.
Oh my. Well, it's worth noting that the basic concepts that Bill Wilson created when he originally created the 12 steps and followed the Washingtonians and the Oxford group opened a door for a problem that had consistently plagued humanity with no solution to having a solution and seeing that there was an option. And in that same way, and my sense is sobriety, given that there's 100 and some different programs based on the 12 steps, all dealing with different symptoms, but all centered in this mental problem. Whenever I think I can do something with impunity that I cannot do with impunity, it compels me not to not do the thing. It compels me to do the thing so I can prove that I can do it.
Yeah.
And that's the insanity.
That's like the jaywalker.
Yes.
That keeps getting hit by the cars. That makes me laugh every time. Right. That's doing things without impunity. I love that.
That's your initial too, the jaywalker.
Yeah. The jaywalker.
Mine too, by the way.
That's like my saying I can productively procrastinate.
Yes.
Without impunity. Like one day I'm going to figure it out.
Well, maybe it's not procrastination, and maybe procrastination is a word you use to abuse yourself in the meantime for the other things you're not doing while you're busy thinking about what you should be doing and aren't paying attention to the things you could be doing.
Right.
So think about it. If you actually perform better, like I finally realized in college, I wait till the last 3 days. I take all my books in there. I take enough cash to be able to eat. And I sit down and I get the encyclopedias. I start defining words. Then I go take a nap. Then I come back. And then I go read a book that has nothing to do with it and come. I had a method and I always got A's on those papers.
That's great.
But the point is, once I knew that, I didn't spend my semester thinking about what I should be doing as much. There was still some of those thoughts. So I could focus on the class.
Right.
Focus on the work at hand.
I love it.
Focus on what was happening. And then I could also go surfing and go ride horses and go do things that were enjoyable and productive rather than be sitting at home beating myself up. My sense is we will use any excuse to justify the self-abuse to make believe that it's not us doing it now, that it's for some other reason out there somewhere else, impending problem that we're thinking about, just so we can excuse ourselves for being irresponsible for what we're doing. When we're doing something irresponsible, it doesn't make us irresponsible to act irresponsible, because responsibility always allows us the chance to be irresponsible, to be wrong, to lie, to cheat, to steal, to do whatever we want. But we aren't required to do any of it. We're free not to do it, just as we are free to do it. And to see this in perspective is to start letting some of those feelings that seem so hard to live with just become obvious, that we've just simply never bothered to live with them for any length of time. That's what's difficult. I thought the whole job was to always feel great.
Right.
And that feeling great was the big job. And that was life, and that was winning. And that's why all the people I grew up around seemed to be drinking to do that. And that's why I thought drinking was a solution, because everybody seemed to be happier until they got drank too much and then got fucking angry and pissed.
Right.
And what was underneath that started coming out and expressing itself, and the sort of dereliction of it, because those cycles can't be set in motion. While denial may feel like relief immediately, it always leads to a corrupt end that's much worse than anything I would have imagined in the moment before I started. Always.
Yeah. Talk about ineffectual.
Exactly. Well, think about effectiveness with ineffectual, effectiveness and defectiveness. Effectiveness is the difference between having something work. It's effective. It works. Defective is dysfunctional. It's not functional. It's acting in ways, all voluntary action, which is how we eat, sleep, house ourselves, feed ourselves, clothe ourselves, interact with other people is based on how well we are functional, how functional we are. They're applicable principles. And generally, anything that's applicable is principled largely. It may not be absolutely principled, but for the most part, if it works, it's aligned with how things are already in the, like laws of the universe. It's aligned with those laws. If you plant a tree and you water it, if you plant a seed and you water it, you're going to get a crop. If you pull it out a week later and wonder why you're not eating 3 months, it's just, if you bury it 25 feet deep because somebody said plant the seed and you don't want anybody to steal it, it's never going to grow. So the point is some understanding, and all that stuff comes. When I'm busy thinking about what I am doing is what I'm not doing, I'm not thinking about what can be done, but what can't be done. And my mastery becomes imagining things that are impossible being possible. And I become delusional in my actions rather than start to see that I've just literally taken a break from rational thought.
Right.
And actually looking at what's effective, what's efficient. How do I be more productive rather than spend all this energy getting less than I started with? And it's obvious if there's any willingness to look accurately about what's going on and stop for a minute. One of the best ways to do it is to talk to other people and just be open. My experience.
Same.
I
mean, you may have cured my ineffectual behavior right today.
Well, the beauty of it too, though, is starting to see that it isn't about never doing it. It's about noticing what you're doing when you're doing it and saying, oh, here, I'm starting in that direction. The chances are, and I don't know, I'm not an odds maker, but I suspect that if human history has been doing this as long as we've been doing it, we grow into ideas that seem so true and real that we don't even bother questioning them. But when they're acting on us, if they're acting on us in ways that compel us to do things that we're ashamed of and feel guilty for and all that kind of stuff that are irritated by and we feel we need to overcome, when all that stuff starts happening, it's some indication that some of those fixed ideas, as you talked about before we got started today, that you're beginning to notice there's ideas there that you don't even think you're thinking. Beginning to allow that to unravel doesn't even mean we need to find out what that thought was to allow the experience to dissipate. The thought when it started is probably not what we're doing today, but the culmination of everything that happened till then is certainly happening now. And if I let be what is now, as it is, I start to actually have the freedom to say, oh, if I'm causing this in thought because that's what I'm feeling, it doesn't disrupt my absolute nature. And what I eventually realized and saw was that I would never know when something was wrong and to be ashamed and guilty if I didn't have a greater knowing sense. Would never occur to me. I would think that being wrong and being an idiot and acting idiotically and being hurtful to people was the best I could do. And I would say, look at me, I've arrived. Look how great this is. But I never felt those things. I felt ashamed and I felt embarrassed and I felt guilty. All that stuff. And I realized I felt guilty because I was guilty. And I felt shameful because the actions were shameful. They weren't healthy. Doesn't mean I shouldn't do them. It certainly means I can do them if I did them. So the question is, do I want to continue?
Right.
And in many cases, the answer is yes.
So funny.
The freedom really is the difference between crying over it, bemoaning it, and self-pity and all of the morose sort of thinking that goes on, and starting to see that it's so silly that we even take it seriously enough to make believe our life depends on it. That when we start, we can easily say, oh, here I go again. I'm up to something.
Here I go again.
I don't even need to know what the root is. If it's coming up the ground and it's a weed, I could pluck it immediately and just say, oh, I don't. And again, it's not overcoming it. It's not pushing past it. It's not getting over it. It's not doing all these things we talk. It's just saying, oh, choice is, do I want to continue? If I'm free right now, if the absolute nature of a principled, absolute present state of being is where we always are. And I would suggest if you test this theory, just ask yourself whenever you think to ask yourself, where am I right now? and notice where your feet are. Notice where you're exactly where you are, always. And you will always have exactly what you have. And that is absolutely reliable wherever you are with whatever you have. And to have that sort of assurance instead of having the constant doubt and uncertainty really begins to show how quickly and easily it is to stabilize thinking and be reminded of reality, what's really happening, what's actually happening, and realize what's happening and realize what self-realization and self-actualization really is. Actually realizing what's happening. Very different approach to what now? And a lot of times, it's just time to sit still for a minute.
On the couch like ever.
Yeah, and spend more time just sort of saying, oh, what I realized, and my tendency is that I work, I stay busy. That distraction, when I get compulsive about it, is about keeping away from the experience I'm having and not intermingling those two. And I can do both. Mm-hmm. I can be busy and I can be productive and I can be paying attention to what's going on, and I can also witness it accurately and see what I'm doing is something that is productive rather than do it simply to try to escape. Most of my mistakes and accidents, seeming mistakes and accidents, come when I'm trying to avoid what I'm actually thinking by being busy and distracted, because there's no traction in distraction. If all I'm doing is pulling away from something, there's an equal weight pulling me back. I'm not going to be performing very productively or efficiently in that. And it's not, integrity is about allowing all the parts to work together, not thinking that I can be devoid of this for that purpose and this, I'm going to get this to get rid of that. And that's trying to be, dismembered, literally. Detached, alone, disconnected.
Being a human doing, not a human being.
Yeah, well, and humans are designed to do. But if we're aligned and not out of order in our thinking, the disorders that tend to plague us, the anxious disorders and the mental disorders and the emotional disorders, don't tend to interfere with our productivity, because the alignment of that light purifies what we're doing. We're actually expressing the fullness of that light rather than just anger, jealousy, rather than trying to pinprick this narrow band that I'm allowing through of the density of my thinking that's giving me this sense of cloud cover that really doesn't exist except to my own experience of what I'm doing. So, closing thoughts?
Ooh la la. Well, closing thoughts. I feel really good. And yeah, I don't know. Do I have a closing thought? I feel like my closing thought is to just be. Do a lot of being.
Well, then you are.
I do. I definitely do. I'm very good.
But you are, regardless of one of the great freedoms is realizing that it doesn't matter what we think about something that's absolute, because it doesn't change.
Ooh, I like it.
I like your ooze. But really coming to terms with that, no matter how we feel, it really begins to we begin to clarify what the obsessive thinking is, because it becomes obvious that it's just this little thing we're doing. It's not everything, because everything is in perfect order, and all of a sudden the proportional impact of thinking just starts to be seen as something, oh, that's something I'm doing. I can do that. And if I can do it, I can undo it. And if I can start it, I can stop it. That freedom, that's recovery from drinking. Isn't, I'll never have a drink again. It's, I could, but in seeing it with the proper perspective, because now I'm thinking of it in accurate terms, it never seems like the best thing to do.
Never.
Right? It just doesn't, that thought just doesn't happen, because it is something I can't do, shouldn't do, can never do, and creating that desperation that always seems to compel the action that I'm claiming I should never do.
I'm still in shock that I don't want to do it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate our time, and
I appreciate it too, and everything is in perfect order.
yes.
Now, when I loved when you had said that you're not going to, I wish I could remember your exact words about going out in the world and not enabling people to, anyway. So everything is in perfect order. What I'm getting at is when I move through the world and I'm thinking everything is in perfect order and I'm interacting with somebody who doesn't think that the world is in a perfect order, what would you do in that situation? If you're,
I don't think the world is necessarily in perfect order. I suspect an infinite absolute being is in perfect order, which
okay,
is bigger than the universe. It's not something that's even limited by the universe. I would say the world is struggling if the world we're talking about is humans.
okay,
And I would say there is pain there and there is disturbance there. But the difference is when you begin to look at a disturbance as a disturbance, it begins to be something you can actually impact productively rather than as something that it shouldn't be and isn't. Because there's an infinite absolute source, that means that there is no pain and there is no, because obviously the way we're interacting with people is creating circumstances that are causing a distraction, literal obsessive distraction from an awareness of unity and an awareness of peace. Doesn't mean that peace is disrupted. It doesn't mean love is disrupted. It doesn't mean that absolute nature is disrupted. It means that what we're doing in thought at a social and global level is exactly what you and I do in thought when we start thinking with those fixed ideas and pretend they're not happening. We become deniers and we become enablers by making believe that somehow or another the best thing I can do is just do what I'm doing and hide myself, which is basically contributing to those same ideas in others.
right,
And there is no
complacent,
hiding anyhow. There is no that
right,
whole idea of being. It's like feeling disconnected is just feeling a thought that has no basis, so it has no connection. A lie has no substance.
right.
It's like
I
the
love that.
biggest number in the world with a denominator of zero.
Right, I love
Zero,
that.
nothing. So that's the illusion. Reality of that love is, if we're here, I would suspect our job, our purpose, our meaning is to express the totality of life rather than the potential conflicts we can create by denying that totality and making believe that totality is simply up to my understanding and my truth that is in opposition to your truth, and thinking someday I'll get everybody to believe my truth is true and they will stop fighting me and the world will be better when everybody else stops fighting, when in fact all that I've got and the only thing I have choice over is my own willingness to continue the fight. Just as
Beautiful.
we talked about earlier with the that Jesus comment about, when if you want to see other people clearly, take the mote, the speck of dust that seems so large in your own eye out, and you'll see that what you're seeing in them is also a speck of dust. It's no bigger than that. There's nothing there.
Beautiful. Thank
So
you.
it's seeing the being isn't what we think of it. It is what it is, regardless of what we think. And that stability is the platform and the stability for us to think from, rather than to try to constantly get to in thought.
Thank you.
Any questions for the next group?
Woof.
And you're welcome. I'd like to do two more of these if you have the time and have the
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. Can I email you the questions?
Yeah. I'll add them later.
Okay.
I love you. You were an incredible woman. I remember seeing you listen, and I could tell the difference between you listening because you didn't look like you were in anguish like some of the people who were.
Oh yeah, it's heaven. Like I'm just at peace. It's pure relief.
And then as you shared, it was fun to listen, especially, your comedic ability is pretty vast. So it was fun to listen to the pokes and probes that gave everybody a little relief. And we've become a real family of thinkers aligned with an expression of love and unity and support. in areas that can be incredibly difficult and incredibly reactive and incredibly caustic in many human affairs. And it's been interesting to see us kind of grow into that, where we all laugh with each other, and the person who's in the center of the laughter actually starts laughing too, because they realize it's probably not as serious as they're thinking it is when the focus is on them, because it's something they're doing that can't quite see. So it's really been incredible, and I appreciate
Super beautiful.
your
I
insight.
appreciate you too. I love you, Jack. Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.